Bon matin, je déclare l'ouverture de la session. I call the meeting to order. I'm going to read and go over some of the processes first before we start. And then before we do that, I've got a small note of business to get consent on from the committee, and then we will start. So, welcome to meeting number 109 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on March 21, 2024, the committee is continuing its study on Islamophobia. Before we begin, I want to remind members and other meeting participants in the room of the following preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injury, all in-person participants are reminded to keep these earpieces, that you all have them in front of you, away from the microphones right here at all time. For that purpose, there is a green circular piece of paper on your desk. You are to place the microphone face down when not in use and in your ear on that. If you are not using the microphone at all because you are totally bilingual, English and French, do not plug it in to the system, so then it won't. You don't need to then worry about it. For those that know one of the two languages, please ensure that you've received proper instructions on how to use the earpiece and how to put it in the interpretation language that you understand. We have members on the committee that will be asking in English, and we have other members that will be asking in French. Alors, il y a, et aussi, on a des...
We also have witnesses who probably speak English or French, so make sure that you understand the questions and the answers. Thank you.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format in accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection test for witnesses. Je vous informe que tous les tests de son...
All of the sound tests were done.
With our study and welcome our members. I would, for the committee itself, a bit of a committee business, the approval for the budget is required, and the clerk has sent the budget to the committee members, and I would request that it be moved and it would be approved. So can I get that, please? Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone has any problem with that? Well, thank you so much. Moved unanimously. So we will now continue. So it's my pleasure to welcome the witnesses for today. We have with us, want to remind members that we have two panels today. We will stop the first panel at 12:15 to allow connection for the witnesses for the second panel, and then we have a hard stop at 1:30 for the second panel. Want to welcome the witnesses for the first panel. À titre personnel, we have Madame Nadia Hassan, professeure adjointe, École d'études sur le...
Adjunct professor on gender studies, York University.
We have from the Jamaat Muslimin Ahmadiyya, Canada, Monsieur Asif Khan, Secrétaire National Relations Publiques.
National Secretary, Public Relations, welcome. Special Representative, the fight against Islamophobia, Ms. Amira El Gabawi, welcome.
Virtually with us from Centre Culturel Islamique de Québec, co-founder
and spokesperson, Boufarja Benhabdallah. Thank you very much.
With 5 minutes each, and I will start with Madame Al-Gawabi, s'il vous plaît.
Madame la Présidente, membres du
Madam Chair, members of the committee, hello. Thank you for inviting me to join you today on the traditional unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The study that you are doing on Islamophobia and the measures that we can take, that we must take, are necessary and urgent. And they have been urgent for quite some time.
Last week, I was in London, Ontario, to commemorate the third annual commemoration of the brutal terrorist attack that killed 4 members of the Afzal family. On June 6, 2021, a man ran his pickup truck into the family while they were out for an evening walk. He killed a mother, a father, a grandmother, and a sister, and left a 9-year-old boy orphaned. This was a landmark case, the first in Canadian history, that found that a violent act based on white nationalism had met the threshold of terrorism. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of Islamophobia and why the work being undertaken by this committee is so important. The attack on the Afzal family followed the equally devastating 2017 mass murder at the Quebec City Mosque when a man entered and opened fire, killing 6 worshippers and injuring 19 others. As a result of these incidents, Canada holds the devastating and regretful distinction of having the most targeted murders of Muslims of any G7 country. Quite simply, being Muslim in Canada is not as safe as it should be. For the past 8 months, things have only gotten worse. We are seeing a terrifying rise in Islamophobia everywhere, compounded by anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism. In London, Ontario, of all places, just this past weekend, a Muslim family's home was deliberately set on fire in what police are now investigating as an Islamophobic, anti-Palestinian hate crime. I spoke with a family member last night who told me, had they been at home, had they rushed to open the door to see what was going on, a family member would have certainly been engulfed in the flames that spread across the front porch and door of the house. This is absolutely horrifying. As this committee has already heard, the National Council of Canadian Muslims reported over 1,000% increase in Islamophobic incidents since October 7th. Nasiha Mental Health Organization reported an alarming 600% increase in helpline calls in the first 5 weeks after the war began. And furthermore, based on our office's research, between October 7th and March 5th, 2024, a variety of organizations collectively received over 1,000 incident reports related to Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism, with a large majority of cases being handled by NCCM and the Muslim Legal Support Center, who have operational legal clinics. This number represents nearly 7 cases received per day in this period. The cases ranged from discrimination to defamation, doxing, blacklisting, assault, vandalism, harassment, and violations of civil liberties. Online, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue has found a 422% increase in Islamophobic social media content within the first few weeks of October 7th. There have been hateful and horrific acts of vandalism in schools, community centers, and places of worship. A few blocks from here, a mosque's windows were covered in feces. There have been various cases of harassment and violent assault. Visibly Muslim women and girls have been targets, being spat on while waiting for public transit or on university campuses, or even more violently assaulted. Disinformation, misinformation, and violent rhetoric proliferate online, further fueling tensions and emboldening bad actors. It feels like near constant fear, vigilance, and worry for oneself, one's family, and one's community. And you don't even have to be Muslim to feel it, as Islamophobia is often conflated with anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian sentiment and impacts allies as well. Madam Chair, I am deeply worried about all of this, and I am worried that things will only escalate. The dehumanization of Muslims that is transpiring in Canada is disturbing in its similarity to the post-9/11 era and the ensuing war on terror. It saddens me that we are once again back to feeling othered and excluded and unable to freely exercise our rights and freedoms, our loyalty to Canada questioned, our efforts to contribute positively overlooked or dismissed. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Dr. Nadia Hassan for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak at this committee. My name is Dr. Nadia Hassan, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies at York University in Toronto. My research and my work focus on Islamophobia and racism. Just 4 days ago, we marked the 3-year anniversary of the Islamophobic terror that was visited upon our London family. And just 6 days from today, we will mark another shameful anniversary. It will have been 5 years since the passage of Bill 21 in Quebec, a law that has legitimized discrimination and Islamophobia with unacceptable impacts on Muslim women's lives. As we sit here between these 2 anniversaries, I invite you to take a moment to think about this very real and very violent context as we proceed today. I'm presenting to you today alongside a panel member who has led a whole community at the Quebec City Mosque through the devastating grief of the 2017 Islamophobic massacre of their loved ones. And we do this in the context of an unprecedented rise in Islamophobia in this country. You would be right to ask what on earth is happening here. How is it possible that so many efforts have been made to study and understand Islamophobia in this country, yet here we are, amidst a frenzy of Islamophobic and racist attacks, discrimination, and profiling of Muslims and Palestinians in Canada? You have already heard numerous stories of Islamophobic and racist incidents from the witnesses who have appeared before this committee thus far. You've heard about children being beaten up because their name sounds like Hamas. You've heard from student protesters who have been threatened with violence and vilified for exercising their right to protest. You've heard from the loved ones of those who have perished in fatal Islamophobic attacks. The reality is that to go through every such incident, this committee would need to meet for weeks on end to hear it all. In these last 8 months, though, we have seen something distinct that needs to be noted. The rise in Islamophobia has dovetailed with the rise in anti-Palestinian racism, with many Muslims being targeted because they are Palestinian or are speaking out for Palestinians or they are perceived as Palestinian. Over the weekend, as my colleague Ms. Gawabi mentioned, the home of a Muslim family in London who had an Our London Family sign and a Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights sign on their lawn was lit on fire. We have also seen racist epithets like terrorist and terrorist sympathizer being thrown around with impunity, triggering not so distant memories of the swift clawback of rights, freedoms, and safety that such terms unleashed on Muslim communities after 9/11. Seeing the ease with which such dangerously racist tropes become repopularized and weaponized even against our children, it is as though they had never truly left our collective consciousness. These are also the tropes that come up in nearly every act of Islamophobic violence. This rhetoric is not benign. At this moment, it is also important to remember that Islamophobia is not just fueled by hateful rhetoric spewed by fringe groups. Islamophobia is also present in everyday life. In October 2023, for example, the Markham Public Library decided to take down displays that were up for Islamic Heritage Month because being Muslim was too controversial at that moment. The fragility of DEI initiatives became undeniable as they were proven to be inadequate to guard against the wholesale demonization of Muslims and Palestinians in this moment. Islamophobia is systemic and it is endemic. Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism intersect in significant and important ways, but they are distinct and require distinct and coordinated approaches to combating them. We have come a long way since 9/11 in recognizing Islamophobia, and I'm glad to see that we are continuing to deepen our understanding of evolving forms of Islamophobia through exercises such as this. But if the last few months have taught us anything, it is that the gains we have made in reclaiming our rights and freedoms were inadequate and are fragile. We have a long way to go to truly dismantle Islamophobia, and I would like to add 3 recommendations to those that you are already considering that reflect the needs of the current climate. One, we need political leadership to speak unequivocally in support of the protection of the rights and freedoms of Muslim and Palestinian communities and, by extension, of all Canadians. Two, we need to dismantle systemic forms of Islamophobic discrimination and racial profiling of Muslims and Palestinians in government agencies and laws. And three, we need to take urgent steps to engage Palestinian communities and understand anti-Palestinian racism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. We'll now go to Mr. Khan, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful, Assalamu alaikum, may peace and blessings be upon you. Thank you for providing an opportunity for the Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat to provide remarks for this session. The Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat is Canada's oldest organized Muslim community. We have centers across the country, approximately in 50 different cities. With the recent issues in Canada, several effects have been observed. I wanted to say first that the conflict in Gaza and the resulting casualties have had a significant impact on Muslim communities worldwide, including in Canada. The rise in tensions often leads to increased polarization and heightened emotions, which can manifest in various ways, including an increase in hate crimes and Islamophobia. I will say that if Western governments, including Canada, were to use their influence, which they have, to put an end to the hostilities in the Holy Lands, the heightened purpose of this conversation would mostly be resolved. With the recent issues in Canada, several effects have been observed, which this body is fully aware of. Some of those observations are an increase in hate crimes, community vigilance, mental health impact, political and social advocacy, interfaith solidarity, and solidarity from Jewish Canadians. With regards to the mental health impact, I would like to point out that the stress and trauma from witnessing violence in Gaza, combined with experiencing or fearing Islamophobic incidents, have affected the mental health of many Muslims in Canada in a way far greater than has ever been observed before. Also of note is the increase in political activism and advocacy among Canadian Muslims. Community leaders and organizations are calling for stronger protections against hate crimes, greater representation in political spheres, and more robust actions to address and combat Islamophobia. In a powerful display of unity, numerous Jewish Canadians have fiercely opposed the actions of the Netanyahu administration in Gaza. They have joined protests, signed petitions, and engaged in interfaith initiatives to support the Palestinian cause and combat Islamophobia. This solidarity has fostered a profound sense of unity and mutual understanding between Jewish and Muslim communities in Canada, highlighting the critical distinction between government actions and the belief of individuals. With this introduction, it is quite apparent that anti-Muslim sentiment has been on the rise. Today, the remarks I will provide are directly from the Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat and provide direction to policymakers on the themes that are required to guide policy. I have a few points to present. First, at such tense times, it is important that Canada stays united and does not fall into the trap of becoming divided, which is what terrorists and hateful people desire. Stay true to Canadian values and upholding the humanity and justice. In terms of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, given that the far right has gained influence, it is important that the government and authorities take this threat seriously. We appreciate that following past serious hate crimes and vandalizations of mosques, the Canadian government has reacted with sympathy and strongly condemned these anti-Muslim attacks. If fear of Islam is on the rise, then as a Muslim community, we must also recognize that we have failed to convey the true and peaceful teachings of Islam to the extent necessary. Certainly, as Ahmadi Muslims, we consider it our duty to redouble our efforts to spread Islam's true teachings and to remove the misconceptions and fears that exist. Our mosques, our centers, and events are open for anyone to attend. A few years ago in Connecticut, USA, a person fired bullets at a mosque of the Ahmadi Muslim community. In response, instead of showing hatred to him, we invited him to our mosque, and over time he came to see that this hatred of Islam was entirely misplaced. He became an ally and supporter of Islam, and so the best means to remove ignorance is through education and by reaching out with open arms. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community will always try to do this. One of the biggest causes of anti-Muslim sentiment is the constant media coverage portraying immigrants and Muslims in a negative light, especially with recent coverage of issues in the Holy Lands. Disproportionate negative coverage or misaligned headlines has spread disinformation and has caused people to become more fearful of Islam and Muslims over time. Thus, the media and politicians must act with more care and consideration. Their words carry weight and influence with others. They must act with responsibility and not just focus upon the negative stories around immigrants, Muslims, and Islam for the sake of sales, clicks, and votes. The media should be encouraged to publicize the multitude of good works done by Muslim communities, and government should play its role in trying to publicize and raise awareness of these issues. As an example, our community holds annual runs across the country to raise funds for local hospitals. We hold numerous blood drives and food drives in cities across Canada. We have a formidable sister charity in Humanity First that, among other things, has a food bank and a shelter bus for the homeless. Also, a growing cause of anti-immigrant sentiment is economic frustration, which is leading people to blame immigrants and Muslims for the issues they see in society. So the government should ensure it balances the rights of all citizens and the rights of immigrants, Indigenous citizens, and visible minorities, and guides the public that there are duties and responsibilities on both sides. If frustrations are allowed to fester, then there is bound to be reactions, so the government has a responsibility to fulfill the rights of both citizens and immigrants. Often calls are made upon Muslims to integrate with society. However, it is important to recognize what true integration is. The Caliph, His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, has stated that integration requires a person to strive in his or her utmost to help their society and nation progress. It is not integration to demand that the minority reject their peaceful held religious views or to adopt customs or traditions that are at odds with their faith. This message also needs to go out from leaders and media, that we should respect one another's differences so long as we are all united in our efforts to serve the nation and strive for its betterment. The Ahmadi Muslim community has always encouraged that when
Mr.
discussing
Khan,
issues
I'm going to stop you, and then we'll
Sure.
take it up with the questions.
Okay.
We're going to begin with questioning, but I will stop when our fourth witness is able to dial in. He's talking with the tech, but in the meantime, I think I'm going to start with the first round, please, and I will ask Mr. Van Popta to start with 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here and spending time with us today on this very important topic. Mr. Khan, I will start with you. Thank you for your testimony. I think it's important that when we study something, anything, that we properly define the terms. And I want to talk about the term Islamophobia. And I have a quote from you, testimony that you gave 3 years ago at the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. So I'm just going to read a paragraph and then ask you to comment on it. You said, "One thing I would like to mention is that the term Islamophobia actually doesn't really help or aid the topic. I know it's not a term that anyone here has created, and it's something that has been accepted by pretty well everybody, but the term phobia means to be afraid of something, and then it's to be afraid of Islam and to be afraid of Muslims. That is, in essence, a bit of a problem. Nonetheless, I know it's a topic for another time. So, sir, I'm going to give you that time right now to comment on that. And just for further context, I did notice in your opening remarks that you did use the term fear a couple of times in association to Islam.
Honor, if I had a magic wand, I'd remove this word, but I do not. And it's a term that's been accepted and used by everyone. So it's a term that I have to kind of use as well to kind of drive home the fact that this particular issue exists. Do I wish it wasn't called Islamophobia? Yes, but again, I don't think I can do much about that right now.
Okay, would you have a better term?
No, I'm not necessarily a wordsmith, but anything other than, throwing in the word Islam or Muslim. When we say anti-Semitism, being a Semite, there's others, including, my family that are Semites as well. So anti-Semitic is a term that doesn't necessarily reference hate towards the Jewish faith, which is rightly so. It shouldn't be that. But this particular term does kind of bring that up, and unfortunately, it's just something that we can't change right now, right? It's a term that's used everywhere throughout media and journalism.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Ms. El Gabwi. This is actually a question I was going to put to our next witness, but he's not here, but I think you're perfectly capable of answering it. There have been 2 cases recently of attacks on people, Canadians, just because they were Muslim and identified as such. One was the Quebec City mosque shooting, and the other was the terrorist attack in London, Ontario, 3 years ago, just a We marked that anniversary just a couple of days ago. So in both cases, the perpetrator was charged and convicted of murder. But in the London case, the person was also charged and convicted on terrorism charges, but not in the Quebec City mosque case. And I wonder why not. And what are your comments on that? How important is it to have added charges relating to terrorism when it didn't at all add to the sentence that the person will serve?
Madam Chair, I'd like to thank the member for his question. First, I just want to, for the committee, regarding the definition of Islamophobia, just so that we're all clear, before I get to the answer. Islamophobia is the racism, stereotypes, prejudice, fear, or acts of hostility directed towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general. In addition to individual acts of intolerance and racial profiling, Islamophobia can lead to viewing and treating Muslims as a greater security threat on an institutional, systemic, and societal level. And so it offers me a bit of a way into the answer here. It's very clear that when the shooter in Quebec City entered the mosque, he had a very clear intention to kill as many Muslims as he could, given that he had been consuming harmful, dangerous narratives about Muslims for some time. He was reacting to what he perceived as, Canada being welcoming of Muslims, and based on these very dangerous ideas about the threat, as per the definition, that Muslims pose to him and his family and his community, he decided to act out. That terrorized the community. It terrorized Quebec Muslims. It terrorized Muslims across Canada and fellow Canadians who were absolutely rightfully shocked by what happened. The fact that similarly in the London attack, the terrorist who went and rammed his truck into a family simply because, again, they were Muslim and he had consumed dangerous narratives, he also terrorized. It is very important that the justice system recognizes when there is an act that is terrorist, because it sends a very strong message that not only were they targeted as individuals, as Canadians, part of our society, but they were specifically targeted with an ideological motive in place. And so the ideological motive is indeed to send a message about the place of Muslims in this country, whether or not they belong. It was a message that was very, very painful for many, and we continue to carry it. Thank you.
I'll cede my time. It's just a few seconds.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question, and thank you very much for your response. We will now go to Member of Parliament, Madame Zahid.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses and for your important testimony on this important issue. My first question is for Madame El-Ghawabi. It has almost been 3 years since our government convened the National Summit on Islamophobia, which brought together community leaders, stakeholders, and produced a series of important recommendations the government has been following through on, including the creation of your office. Budget 2024 included $7.3 million in funding over 6 years to support the work which you are doing. So could you please outline what you see as the next action steps beyond the National Summit and your activities to address the alarming increase in Islamophobia, especially in the last few months?
Madam Chair, I thank the member for her excellent question. Absolutely, since the National Summit on Islamophobia, which was convened following the tragic terrorist attack in London, Ontario, the federal government has indeed followed up on various recommendations that were made at the summit, 35% of which have been followed up on, according to the Anti-Racism Secretariat, and which has been communicated to communities. Now, along with the creation of my office, what I have attempted to identify is the need to support the government on 3 key outcomes for Muslims in Canada. That Muslims in Canada can live lives of dignity that is free of discrimination, that Muslims are free from exposure of hate both on and offline, and that Muslims working in our federal public service do not face bias and discrimination. And so my role is to provide advice, guidance, it's to raise awareness and education In the past year, before the tragic events of October 7th and onwards, we had already committed to launching a guide on how law enforcement can address anti-Muslim hate crimes in our communities. It was launched in September of last year. It's the OSCE Practical Guide. We also launched a digital toolkit for Islamic History Month to highlight the incredible resilience of Muslim women and girls who have sadly faced gendered Islamophobia, as many know, and which highlighted efforts of Edmonton Muslim women to highlight the work that they're doing to ensure that their communities remain safe. And so we continue to provide this type of advice and work. We are also have been undertaking studies of how young people are faring in our country since October 7th, in which to provide support to the government in understanding the crucial issue of belonging and the need for the federal government to ensure that all communities, and in particular Muslim communities who face discrimination and bias, that our young people are assured that they do belong, that they have mental health support they require, and that all of our institutions address the concerns that they continue to raise.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Hassan. Could you please talk about your perspective as a professor about the student protests against the war in Gaza at York University, the response of the administration, and how York has handled the larger issue of Islamophobia on campus and as well as in academia?
Thank you so much for the question, MP Zahid. I think student protests are such an amazing phenomenon in Canadian history when it comes to standing up for issues related to social justice. It's something that's such an enriching part of our democracy, something that has we've seen again and again throughout Canadian history, the way student protests can lead to real change in the right direction. What we've seen at York, just very recently, there were a student encampment set up just for, I think, maybe 24 hours. And it's all very new because this happened last week, but the administration did forcibly remove the encampments with the involvement of the police. And we're seeing many, and York's not the only one, we've seen many university administrations in many different jurisdictions in Canada taking the bizarre approach of criminalizing student protest, which I think is having a really chilling effect on students. It's important to remember that these encampments have been largely peaceful protests, and they're not a new phenomenon. Encampments as a form of protest have been happening against poverty, homelessness, tuition hikes, war. So it's not something new, and I think we all need to ask some questions, and important questions about why these particular ones are being clamped down and criminalized with such force in so many campuses around the country. Like the student right to protest and the culture of dissent and protest and critique and critical thinking is at stake, in my opinion.
Thank you. You also touched upon in your testimony about Bill 21. So could you please explain how Bill 21 creates systemic discrimination?
I'm actually, over the last 3 years, I've been conducting a study on the impact of Bill 21, specifically on the experiences of Muslim women in their workplaces and in their experiences in searching for a job. So this is very much about Muslim women's livelihoods, their ability to actually work and live in Quebec. And what we found, and I can give you sort of a preview of those findings, is really quite stunning. Muslim women are 4 times more likely to experience physical violence and aggression at their workplace. So in their workplace, at the hands of their supervisor, at the hands of their colleagues and clients. And this is, these Muslim women are reporting this as an increase that they've seen since Bill 21 came into effect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On continue maintenant avec 6 minutes.
And now we'll continue with 6 minutes for MP Fortin, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I would say that you all have very important testimony, and I wish we could give you longer for your testimony, and I'll only have 6 minutes, so I will be rather strict on time. I'd like to ask a question of Ms. El Gawabi. Now, I've been listening to your testimony, and this is not the first day that we've spent on anti-Muslim sentiments. We've also looked at anti-Semitism, and you exposed similar circumstances of discrimination which are absolutely terrible and against which we must fight. Ms. El Gawabi, can you explain in 30 seconds to 1 minute why there is such a strong relationship between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, in your opinion? Thank you to the member for the question, Madam Chair. What I would say is that what we're seeing in Gaza has an impact here on Jewish and Muslim communities in Canada, even if it really is a political conflict and not a religious conflict, but the impact on the communities is heavy and difficult and raises all sorts of emotions. But when we talk about the conflict here, it's important to take the time to talk together in a way that is really respectful. We need to work together so that everybody has the freedom to express their opinions, but do so in a truly respectful way. Thank you. You said that the conflict in Gaza has had important effects here, and I noticed that you didn't intervene very quickly after the events of October 7th. I understand that an extremist Islamic group was to blame, but as a spokesperson on Islamophobia, can you tell me once again in 30 to 60 seconds why it took you so long to react after the events of October 7th? Thank you for the question.
And that my role is a domestic role. And so in the guidance and advice that I provide the federal government, it is on how policies impact on Muslims here at home. So as everyone can understand, the shocking events of October 7th needed time to review and see how it was going to impact on our communities. And therefore,
Mais vous me dites que ça a eu un impact.
But you say that it had a really important impact on Jewish-Muslim relationships in Canada. So it seems to me that the very day that it occurred, it was clear that things were going to get pretty bad in Canada and elsewhere. So didn't you think it important to react immediately? Were you under pressure?
I think it's so important that when we're dealing with issues that are going to cause great emotional distress to our communities, that we take our time, and that it is very important for elected officials in particular to ensure, as well as representatives, to ensure that their discourse is sensitive and taking into consideration the full impacts here domestically. And so it is very important to note that I was very clear in the statement to condemn all forms of violence against innocent civilians and to ensure that our communities were not going to face the types of civil liberties encroachment that we have seen previously, as well as efforts to suggest that somehow Muslims have to constantly condemn every time a terrorist group takes some kind of action. We've moved beyond that. Muslims are no longer going to accept being treated as second-class citizens where they have to prove their loyalty. Thank you.
Merci, Madame El Gawabi.
Thank you, Ms. El Gawabi. Thank you. I appreciate what you said. That you said that, if I understand correctly, violence, terrorism, hate fomented against any group, whether they're Jewish, Muslim, Catholic, or any other group, is unacceptable. In the Criminal Code, in 319, there is a section that bans fomenting hate, but there's an exception that says that there is a reasonable defense if it is an opinion that is founded on a religious text. So that creates an exception for anti-Semitism or hate. In your opinion, should these exceptions be eliminated, or should we continue to have this defense if we're charged with fomenting hate as long as it's based on a religious text? Yes, in the past, I've mentioned that it was up to members of parliament to debate legislation and take decisions when it comes to the best interests of their electors. My role is not to give my personal opinion, but yes, but you're here to help the Muslim community integrate. Point of order, Madam Chair. Time is up.
We will complete the first round with Mr. Garrison for 6 minutes, and then our fourth witness is now going to be coming on. So I will then ask for a brief 1 moment after Mr. Garrison to ensure that our fourth witness has his time with 5 minutes, and then we'll continue with the second round. So Mr. Garrison, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think I have to start by saying I'm disturbed when inadvertently or purposely this committee ends up engaging in othering the Muslim community. And I think we're seeing examples of that this morning, and I apologize to our witnesses. I thank them for being here today to give very important testimony. I want to go back to Dr. Hassan, because I think you were just starting to talk about your work on the impact on Muslim women. And we live in a society that has quite often historically tried to police dress of women and tried to blame women for things that happen to them because of dress choices they make. And while I'm not trying to reduce the salience of what's happening with Muslim women now, I do think it's important for us to remember there's a long tradition of policing women and their dress in this country. But what do you see as different about this now than that kind of traditional concern about the way women look and dress?
Well, I think now we've legalized our ability to discriminate against women who dress a certain way. And discriminate not in an insignificant way. This is their livelihoods that we're talking about. These are their investments in their careers that have just vanished because of a law that says that they can't work in certain public sector jobs. I think the impact of this has been felt far and wide by Muslim women in Quebec, and my research shows that it has been so detrimental to not only Muslim women's livelihoods, but their mental health, their ability to feel like they belong, that they're safe or secure in Quebec. Muslim women report feeling like they're targeted and that they're in the crosshairs of kind of becoming political punching bags in Quebec, and they're kind of dreading what the Quebec government is going to do next to take away their rights. As a result, my studies found that over 73% of Muslim women in Quebec are considering leaving the province altogether. So this is not okay. Like, this is not what we call social harmony. It completely flies in the face of the fact that the Quebec government is essentially trying to promote the bill as something that is enabling social harmony. It is not. The violence women are experiencing, the mental distress, the threats to their personal, physical safety and security is at stake right now.
And I know that your research is focused on Quebec, but do you see this having impacts outside of the province of Quebec?
Absolutely. And I think as we're talking about, especially the current moment that we're in, we're seeing many Islamophobic attacks are actually directed at Muslim women that wear a hijab. And these are attacks that range from Muslim women having their hijab ripped off, being physically assaulted, like punched in the head, punched in the stomach, Muslim women being spat on, which is a wildly common phenomenon since last fall. So it's actually quite atrocious what Muslim women in particular are facing. And Islamophobia is gendered in very, very significant and important ways that I think it would be wise for this committee to remember as you think about what your next steps are going to be.
And I'd like to ask Madam Al-Gawabi to weigh in on the same question in her work. How is she finding the question of gender affecting the ability to combat Islamophobia?
Yes, thank you to the member, Madam Chair. It's a very important question, absolutely. As Dr. Hassan has noted, Muslim women who wear the headscarf, who are visible, are indeed targeted in various ways, whether it's discrimination on the job, whether it's discrimination from holding various types of employment right across Canada. This is a phenomenon. We actually see the underemployment of Muslim women within Canadian employment areas, even though they have a very high level of education, it's not matching up to the types of employment that they're able to get. And so what we realize then is Canada is losing an incredible opportunity to benefit from the incredible professional attainment that these women can have. The contributions they can have in our society are huge. And so when we think about the ways in which this study can provide advice, it is indeed to be very mindful of the fact that there are all sorts of stereotypes that exist around Muslim women, and particularly those who choose to wear the head covering, the hijab. And what I have heard from women across the country, including in Quebec, is again, not only is this Law 21 impacting women in particular professions, i.e. in teaching and in the legal profession, but it has sort of an impact that sets out right through the society. Because the moment that you have what has been termed to this committee second-class citizenship, where some people have less rights than others, immediately that gives license to those that may hold discriminatory views the permission to treat these citizens differently than others. And so this is an extremely problematic pathway that Canada is on, and harms our social cohesion, but also our prosperity and our success.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's a really important perspective to have brought to these hearings. I thank both of you.
Thank you very much. Chers collègues, give us a minute, please, to allow the introduction of our fourth witness here. So I'm suspending for a minute. l'ouverture.
Okay, and we're back, and we will continue with the testimony of Mr. Boufelja Ben Abdallah, co-founder and spokesperson of the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec, for 5 minutes, please. And when there's 30 seconds left, I will show you this card. Mr. Ben Abdallah, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you, members of the committee, for inviting me to this very important panel discussion. Islamophobia from yesterday to today has evolved and continues to evolve. It's always the same story, which is creating a linkage between Islam and what's happening elsewhere. The majority of Quebecers realizes that we're here, but a segment of the population believes that every time there's an event elsewhere, Muslims in Quebec have to explain themselves. This hasn't stopped, and we've had to hold panels to explain things, and that sends the message that we have to explain ourselves, we have to show that we're innocent, but in fact we live in a free country where life is good, and we're not here to speak on behalf of bad actors. I will be brief because 5 minutes is not very long to provide much detail. Starting in 2008, Quebec's Islamic Cultural Center was co-founded by myself. We needed a place to pray, to educate our children, to be together, not to convert anyone or show that Islam was vindictive. No, it was the very opposite. But we began receiving hate messages, and I can give you a few examples of threats, messages against the mosque, messages saying that people should leave and go home. There were graffitis on our walls. There were swastikas that were graffitied onto our walls. So there was an amalgamation between Jewish people and Muslims. There was a pig's head, and Trash Radio started speaking out against Muslims. Rather than focusing on Muslims' contribution to society, they described Muslims as troublemakers, people who came from elsewhere. So this trash talk radio played an important role. And then, of course, the fact that some Muslim women wear hijab and head coverings, they started getting attacked in public places. It was inhuman and created unimaginable pain. And then that leads us to the tragedy at the mosque. So it's a little step, actually, between all of the threats that we received and the events. The police tried to help, but in 2017, in January, 6 parents were killed. They left 7 widows and 17 children without fathers. 45 people were traumatized. And of course, there's another victim who received 6 bullets and still has a bullet in his body. And so you can see that starting with this minority sending insults, this hatred towards the other, towards Muslims, led to a tragedy which not only perturbed the Muslim community, but also Quebec society as a whole and Canadian society as well. Luckily, our brothers and sisters came to comfort us, and we will never forget their empathy as they came to our sides to support us. But we have to remember that within this positive majority, there is a negative minority that speaks louder than anybody else. Mr. Ben Abdallah, I'm going to interrupt you for now, and we'll continue with questions, and maybe you can provide more information in your answers. Thank you very much. And we will now start the second round.
MP Khanna to please begin with his 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I want to thank the witnesses here today for sharing their perspectives and their testimony. I live in Woodstock, which is not too far from London, and obviously our hearts go out to the terrorist attack that happened there a few years ago, but also with the news we're hearing over the weekend of that fire that was started on a Muslim family's home. Obviously, we condemn that, and I think all parties are united against that, and hopefully whoever is responsible is punished with the full extent of the law and held responsible for that. My question is going to be towards Mr. Asif Khan. I've attended many of your community events, the Jamaat holds. I've been to Jalsas, I've been to your Canada Day celebrations in Maples, and there's a growing community in my riding as well. And you know, your charity does great work. Humanity First steps up, especially during the time of need. And when we are seeing 2 million Canadians going to food banks, they have stepped up and shared that message of love for all, hatred for none. And I think that's a beautiful message, and that's a Canadian message. You also hold interfaith forums and open houses to raise awareness. In your testimony, you had mentioned that knowledge over ignorance. I think when you educate the community, we're able to tackle some of these misconceptions that exist towards the Muslim faith. I just wanted you to, if you could update the committee on some of the initiatives you have taken as a Jamaat, and what kind of benefit you have seen firsthand, what kind of tangible benefit you've seen firsthand with the work you're doing, proactively engaging Canadians.
Thank you for the question. During my testimony, I mentioned that the Muslim community needs to step up, right? So if there's a misunderstanding of Islam, it's also our responsibility as Muslims to make others aware of what our faith is, and the faith is about peace. Now, interfaith events is something that we've been doing for several years. We've probably held hundreds of them across the country, even in places like Nunavut. And the idea is to focus on your commonalities, not on your differences. I think one of the questions that was kind of floating around earlier just kind of stabs at differences, and that's incorrect. Let's focus on what we have common together. And also speaking to the earlier question about the hijab and so forth, like integration isn't doing what certain people might feel that is required. Integration is making sure that individuals such as myself and other members of other communities are improving and raising up Canada. That's integration. And to focus on things like the hijab and whatnot is incorrect. So I think interfaith programs just brings us all together, right? It creates commonalities. It doesn't create division.
Thank you for that. And have you seen a positive impact from that in the community? Have you seen people coming together? What has the response been for those?
Yeah, definitely. Like obviously, I think everybody likes to talk about their good works, what their community does, the good things that their communities believe in, and the values that they have. This makes everybody feel together. So whenever we do these interfaith programs in different cities, I think it allows for everyone to realize that, we're all a part of the same family, the human family.
Thank you for that. And so recently we've been seeing a lot of attacks on places of worship, regardless of faith. We've seen it potentially with the church in Toronto. We've seen it with synagogues, mosques, gurdwaras, mandirs. We are seeing a rise. Your headquarters is located in Maple. What kind of, what's the sentiment of your congregation in your community? Is there an underlying fear of these attacks? And just want to get a ground reality check from you on what you're seeing, what you're hearing on the ground.
So we're our national headquarters is in Vaughan, Ontario. It's socioeconomically it's a little bit different than other parts of the country, but we have places of our mosques in different cities everywhere. And this issue that has been spoken about of Islamophobia, or this fear of, is somebody looking at me differently, is somebody thinking about me differently, exists. It's not fake. Like I'm 51 years old this year. I was born here. And, when I was young, there were, certain slurs that were used that maybe were anti-immigrant, maybe not anti-Muslim, and then it kind of went away. And I talked about, this movement of the right gathering some steam. And what's happened down south and even happening over here, the hate that took 50 years for us to bury has risen to the surface. And you don't bury this stuff again in 4 years. It takes a while, so we need to focus on this.
Thank you for that. Next part of the question will be to Ms. Agwabi. Obviously, as you mentioned here from testimony, there's been a massive spike in hate, obviously with the Muslim community, but also other faiths as well. The Liberal government has brought forward some changes. It's been 3 years.
I'm sorry, Mr. Khanna. I'm going to have to. No, it's okay. I'm trying to keep the time here. We'll come back to that question, and if it doesn't get posed again, and you have, would you mind sending us something in writing? I will now go for 5 minutes to MP Zubiri, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Et je veux donner une...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to give 30 seconds to the witness from Quebec City to finish what he was saying, and then I'll move on to another question.
Je pense qu'il n'est pas... la connexion ne fonctionne pas, donc...
I'm not sure the connection is working, so I will continue with Ms. Hassan.
You were speaking about research that you had done with respect to Bill 21 and intersectionality with women. Do you have any other points you'd like to add in the next few seconds?
There's so many points I can add, but there is one of the things I wanted to say is that the study that we looked at actually looked at women who were working within the public sector, but also a lot of them were working outside of the public sector. So the impacts of Bill 21 are well beyond the technical scope of the law. And I think one of the places we found it is actually in job search experiences. So women applying for jobs in healthcare, being asked about their religious identity, which is, categorically illegal. But very openly being asked about their religious identity. And it was a very frequent experience. Over 40% of women reported that they were asked about their religious identity during a job interview. So we have a problem here of a much broader impact.
So the impacts go well beyond the letter of the law?
Well beyond the letter of the law.
And you opine that the letter of the law, in your opinion, is?
Within the public sector, right? Sorry, was that?
Do you opine that the letter of the law is discriminatory in your opinion?
Yes, the letter of the law is discriminatory in and of itself, but we're seeing discriminatory impacts also well beyond the law. So to truly understand what the impact of Bill 21 has been on Muslim women in Quebec.
Which I believe is what the courts themselves said, the lower courts. Is that correct?
That's right.
And in terms of your research on this, is it yet completed? And if so, can you submit it to this committee for analysts to include in their report?
Yes, I can.
Please, I'd ask you to highlight any particular points you'd like to bring to the attention of the analysts, as you submit that to us in this committee. Now, Ms. Agwabi, I appreciate what you were saying earlier with respect to being considered in hot conversations, in particular as they relate to discrimination, as they relate to the Middle East. And I appreciate fully how your role is wholly domestic. And so I respect the fact that you were considered in how you leaned into a conversation. Do you have anything that you'd like to add? And I know that you've gone on the record many times condemning any form of violence, in particular violence that has happened in the Middle East, violence conducted by the listed group Hamas. But if there's anything you'd like to add about the thoughtfulness that is necessary when leaning into this particular conversation, the thoughtfulness in general of those who are pronouncing themselves on social media.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to thank the member for the question. This is a moment of leadership for our country. It really is not up to one office or one level of government or one community. It really is a collective effort in which we model what it means to be Canadian, what it means to live in a country as pluralistic, as diverse, as peaceful as Canada. And so while the temptation to seek, clicks online and to sort of win those types of competitions as to, how many views does your video obtain?
I get your point, and we have less than a minute left.
Sure.
I have lived in when I've seen, and many of those who are tuning in right now have seen how past governments, previous to 2015, have maligned the Muslim community in the past. In some cases, provincial governments use minorities as piñatas to score populist political points. How important is it that opinion makers from media to politics, and I think Mr. Gerritsen referred to this about underhanded commentary, even as we are having you testify. How important is it for opinion makers to be constructive and measured in their comments?
Children are watching us right now. They're watching to see how we navigate this very difficult time for our country. And it really is critical and crucial that every statement, every message is one that brings people together, that recognizes the diversity, protects freedom of expression, speech, and assembly, all while maintaining inclusive, safe communities where everyone can be who they are without fear.
Thank you very much. We will now go to 2.5 minutes round each for Mr. Fortin, followed by Mr. Garrison, please. Monsieur Fortin, la parole est à vous. 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Fortin. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. El Gawabi, I'd like to come back to our discussion that we were having, but as I was saying, you spoke out a little bit later than October 7th, about 10 days later, and then earlier on you were talking about Bill 21, which seemed to you to be a bad law or bad decision, and I asked you a question about hate. Maybe I didn't express myself correctly. Maybe you didn't understand what I meant, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about this if you want to share your opinion. At the moment, it is forbidden to express hate. And of course, we heard Mr. Ben Abdallah talk about the shooting, and of course, Mr. Khan talking about his faith being about peace. I agree with all of that, but fomenting hate seems to me to be a bad thing. No matter what your religion is or your beliefs are, at the moment, fomenting hate is against the law, but there is an exception in the law that says that you can have a defense if your speech is based on a religious text. So in my opinion, this doesn't make sense, but do you agree with me that we should eliminate the exception there? I'd like to hear your opinion. Why do you think we should allow fomenting hate or anti-Semitism as long as it's based on religious text? Point of order, Madam Chair. I did not hear a link there. I have great respect for the member opposite, but there is no link in the question to our study. So I'm asking you as chair, is there a direct link between the question and the study? Thank you for the point of order. I believe Mr. Fortin has finished his question and I stopped the time. Did you finish your question? Do you want an answer now or are you continuing? I need an answer before I can continue. If you're done, you have 39 seconds left. The point of order is moot. I'm not sure I understand your question, but I did finish asking my question. I was waiting for the answer. If you would like, I can respond to Mr. Zuberi's argument. Okay. I don't think we should spend much time on this point of order because we are almost finished. Yes. And in any case, we've been listening to testimony for a few days. It seems to me that hate is at the heart of this debate. Witnesses raise the issue of hate, so I don't really see how this would make sense. The point of order would make sense. Okay, thank you. Please, we have 39 seconds left. I would like to hear Ms. El-Gawabi's answer with 39 seconds left on the clock. Thank you. Madam Chair.
So again, I think what's clear, and it's quite sad and unfortunate, that Muslims are constantly asked to condemn hate. Of course, Muslims join fellow Canadians in condemning all forms of hate. The underlying premise of the question suggests that somehow Muslim communities or other religious minority communities are fomenting hate.
Madame El-Gawabi, il reste quelques secondes.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Je veux juste savoir ce que vous en pensez.
I think I can continue to
Vous
finish.
préférez ne pas répondre?
Would you prefer not to answer? You have 9 seconds. You haven't answered. You just said Muslims shouldn't have to answer. Okay, thank you. Time is up. Thanks anyway, Ms. El-Gawabi.
2.5 seconds, please. 2.5 minutes. I wish.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say once again, as a gay man who's often been othered in our society, and as a gay man who's married to a person of color who's often presumed to be Muslim because of his nationality, I have some personal experience with what we see just going on here, that questions are asked of Muslims that are not asked of anyone else. And it's part of what I think all our witnesses have said. There's somehow extra test of loyalty or commitment to diversity that we demand of Muslims who appear before us. And I'm disturbed by that. So I'm really not sure what to ask at this point, but I want to go back to Mr. Khan's point about unity and diversity and reaching out, because there are many victims of hate in this country and many victims of othering, and for him to talk a bit more about his experience in trying to join hands against the hatred.
Sorry, the question, you want me to just kind of elaborate on it?
Yeah, in terms of the success of joining hands against hatred amongst all communities.
So I don't want to underscore, obviously, the need of this conversation. There is a growing issue of hate in the country against Muslims and others, but the way to resolve it is through policy and by enacting certain words that we will say or the media will say. But this idea of unity and getting together and understanding each other's commonalities is the only way to simmer the issue, right? We can't keep like this, right? This will just create further division, and other comments are going to come. And just people want to divide us. We are Canadians. All of us are Canadians. We're together in this, in making this country better, regardless of what faith we belong to. And so, again, focus on commonalities. Focus on what brings us together. As part of the solution, there's obviously many other things that need to be done too.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. With 30 seconds left, I am going to take liberty to ask Madame El-Gawabi a question, and that is, what relationship is there between your office and the office of Deborah Lyons, and does the work overlap at all? Can you please comment on that and tell us what this government has done in the last couple of years? And I know it's a large question, but I'm going to give you 2 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for the question. So first, in terms of the relationship of my office with the Office of Special Envoy on Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism, Deborah Lyons, she and myself are in regular contact. Both of us are extremely seized and saddened with the rise in hate that are impacting our communities across the country. And so we are constantly wondering and questioning and looking for examples within our very own communities where people are already coming together. And so, for instance, here in Ottawa, there is a Muslim educator and a local rabbi who have been, even before October 7th, before this fall, they have presentations in schools in order to demystify, to address, to combat stereotypes and narratives about their communities. And I think looking for those opportunities to highlight where people are working together. Even before this fall, I had met with members of the Jewish Family Services of Ottawa who have a very diverse staff, which include many Muslim staff as well. So the examples that exist already in our communities are quite broad. And in that vein, the federal government just this weekend passed or introduced its anti-racism strategy for the next 4 years. And this is a strategy that really builds on past strategies to address and combat hate and racism against any community in this country, with a lot of investments in community initiatives. And I think there's one thing I would leave with this committee. Again, it's not up to government to fix this. It really is up to communities themselves, but we need to give them that support. We need to support leaders, community organizations that are already doing the work, need help to do it, financial support and otherwise, because at the end of the day, Canadians understand that we need each other. We need each other to succeed. We need each other to support the vision of a country where everyone feels included. And the federal government has invested quite heavily in these sorts of initiatives and will continue to do so, I hope.
Thank you very much, and you're exactly 2 minutes. So with that, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing on our first panel. If there's anything you believe you did not get a chance to respond to, please send it to us. And thank you very much. I will suspend for a minute to give an opportunity for the next panelists to be tested if they're virtually, and if they're in the room to please come to the front. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're starting.
I am told we are ready to start with our second panel. And again, for the benefit of our new witnesses who are appearing virtually or are in person, please ensure that your headsets or that you have the language of your choice, because we do have members that will be asking in French and other members that will be asking in English, and you are free to vous pouvez répondre en anglais ou en français, but to make sure that you have those devices already set, and we will keep our time. So welcome to our meeting. I want to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. We have with us in person in the room, Monsieur Hussein Panjou, President, Association Canadienne des Avocats Musulmans, Madame Fawziya Mazhar, Executive Director, Coalition of Women Musulmanes de KW. Qu'est-ce que c'est KW? KW? Okay. And par videoconference on the screen, we have Imam and Executive Director Abdullah Yusri of Société de la Ummah Society from Nova Scotia, and Julie McFarlane, Professeur émérite distingué de loi par videoconférence à titre personnel. So now we will start with 5 minutes each to the four witnesses for your opening remarks. Please try and pay attention if you're in virtually or in person. When I raise the 30-second marks, that means you only have 30 seconds. And when time is up, I will raise the time is up just to allow. And we have a hard stop at 30 minutes past, so we have 55 minutes remaining. And I will start with Madame Fawziya Mazhar, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, bonjour, assalamu alaikum, greetings of peace. I've come to you from the Haldimand Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the 6 nations of the Grand River and are within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I'm here on behalf of the Coalition of Muslim Women of KW, CMW, which provides opportunities for personal and professional growth for Muslim women and youth while addressing issues of gender-based violence, racism, discrimination, Islamophobia, and gendered Islamophobia through innovative programming and services, partnerships and collaboration, bridge building and public education, and advocacy and outreach. In April of 2021, CMW launched its hate reporting, documentation, and support services with seed funding from Department of Canadian Heritage. This first-of-its-kind service was built upon a decade of CMW's work against hate, racism, and Islamophobia in Waterloo region. Now known as Anti-Hate Services, or AHS, it provides various avenues to report and document hate and discrimination. It also provides an area of support services to the victims of hate and discrimination. CMW releases yearly reports based on the data collected by AHS. We just released the 3rd annual Snapshot of Hate in Waterloo Region report last week. The report covering January 1st to December 31st of 2023 shows a 26% increase in the reported cases, with a total of 115 cases reported. Waterloo Region Police Services, or WRPS, have reported a total of 369 hate-motivated crimes in 2023, an increase of 94% from 2022. 46% of the total cases through AHS were reported between October and December of 2023. When compared to the same time frame in 2022, an 83% increase in reported hate incidents and a 212% increase in Islamophobic, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian hate was noted. The AHS report documented 46 cases, that is 40%, motivated by Islamophobia, and 12 cases, that is 10%, motivated by anti-Palestinian hate. WRPS reported a total of 67 hate-motivated crimes targeting religion. However, only 2 of the 67 cases are reported as directed towards Islamic identity. 41% of the cases documented by AHS targeted individuals self-identified as Arab, and another 26% South Asian. WRPS reported 190 race-based hate-motivated crimes, most often targeting Black individuals. Key populations reflected in AHS report include females and youth under the age of 24. A total of 74 cases, 64% victimized female, and further 38 cases, 41% victimized youth under the age of 24. Furthermore, 69% of female and 71% of youth included Islamophobia as a reason for the incident. During an analysis of the data, a trend tying religious or cultural clothing directly to the victim's experience of hate emerged. Often this clothing was mentioned directly in verbal hate harassment cases. Of the 115 victims, 48% were wearing a hijab or a niqab, and in 7 cases, victims were wearing the keffiyeh. AHS report fills a crucial gap in the police-reported hate crimes, as you may have noticed. The trends emerging from AHS report are important to note for this committee. Women and youth in the Canadian Muslim communities are bearing the brunt of Islamophobia. They're more at risk of physical assault, verbal abuse, harassment in public spaces and educational environment, bullying and intimidation, and discrimination in workplaces and educational institutions. I hope that this esteemed committee will pay the due attention to the experiences of Muslim women and youth as part of the study on Islamophobia. It will also be important to look into the experiences of Canadian Arab and Palestinian communities to understand how Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism, and anti-Palestinian racism intersect. The report cited here is available at cmw-kw.org under the Publications tab in English.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. We will now go to up to 5 minutes, please, with Mr. Hussein Panjou, please, President.
Madam Speaker and honorable members of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, hello, bonjour, and assalamu alaikum, and thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Hussein Panjou, and I have the pleasure of serving as the National Chair for the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association, also known as the CMLA. And our organization is a non-for-profit corporation that's dedicated to promoting the objectives and advocating on behalf of self-identifying members of the Muslim legal community. The CMLA consists of 5 provincial chapters consisting of over 400 members across the country, including professionals from all areas of the legal profession, including several sitting judges. We regularly appear in appellate court matters related to human rights and provide legal input and government consultations, just like this. And recently, the Senate Standing Committee on Human Rights adopted several elements of our testimony in their landmark report on Islamophobia and its impact on Muslims in Canada. This committee has already heard very detailed testimony about the history of Islamophobia, including the recent high-profile incidents in Quebec City and in London, Ontario. And in my submissions, I'm going to be highlighting the alarming rise in Islamophobia since October the 7th, with a focus on its impacts on local communities. In 2018, the CMLA launched a legal clinic known as the Muslim Legal Support Center, which prioritizes access to justice for Muslims in Ontario. And since the conflict, this clinic has encountered a 400% rise in intakes on issues ranging from employment discrimination to improper treatments in schools. The CMLA has also heard numerous concerning examples from lawyers and law students across Canada who have faced harsh and unwarranted consequences in response to legitimate speech regarding this conflict. There is a widespread fear that if lawyers or students express political views that differ from their colleagues, that they will face discrimination in the employment context. Furthermore, on social media, some lawyers have openly called for the establishment of blacklists of lawyers and law students who participate in pro-Palestinian activities and demonstrations. And 2 weeks ago, a retired judge issued a 200-page review that denounced one such backlash against law students who signed a pro-Palestinian petition, which required him to publicly call for civility and respectful dialogue within the legal community. Unfortunately, there's also been a recent rise in governmental policies that also have contributed to Islamophobia. This has included police officers using a disproportionate amount of force and tactics on pro-Palestinian demonstrators. This has also included a provincial legislature that now prohibits elected officials from wearing the keffiyeh in the workplace, which evokes another provincial bill that bans public sector workers from wearing the hijab. This even includes our highest court recently uninviting racialized speaking delegates, vaguely citing the speaker's social media comments regarding the same conflict. Now, our communities are already over-policed and underserved. And these recent decisions further embolden Islamophobic incidents on the ground. Now, in closing, if the government wants to address Islamophobia, they need to take accountability and focus on 3 main areas. First, rebuilding trust with communities. The lack of trust is found across governmental institutions and is especially pronounced in national security, criminal justice, and law enforcement departments. Secondly, recognizing that policies shape perceptions. Islamophobia is learned behavior. And when governments introduce actions, languages, and policies that target particular groups, that often provides a license for other Canadians to discriminate against these same communities. And thirdly, meaningfully engaging with Muslim community and related groups. And this includes an understanding of the intersectional forms of discrimination that include sexism and anti-Palestinian racism. These are distinct concepts and have a compounding effect that is greater than the sum of its parts. And there's an inherent need to appreciate the lived experiences of our groups when developing and implementing policies that directly affect us. And together, these principles can lead to a more cohesive environment, but also to fairer policies and more defensible laws that will stand the test of challenges in our appeal courts and in the courts of public opinion. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to expound on any of these themes and any other issues that will be helpful for this committee.
Thank you very much for your time. We'll now go to Imam Abdullah Yusri, please, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Honorable Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Abdullah Yusri. I'm the Imam and Executive Director of the Ummah Society. It's the largest Muslim charity in the Atlantic region. As an Imam, my role is unique. I am often the first stop for community members when hate crimes occur, and also the first stop for government officials in the same circumstances. I witness firsthand the impact of Islamophobia on individuals of our community. I have counseled children who are bullied in schools, women who are harassed for wearing hijabs, and men who are profiled and discriminated against in workplaces and public spaces. Since October the 7th, the situation has worsened significantly. I have observed a notable spike in Islamophobic attacks through physical assaults, verbal abuse, and a disturbing rise in hate speech. There is fear everywhere in the community. Also, there is anger and frustration for lack of accountability towards the aggression taking place against members of the Muslim community here in Canada. I feel the justice system has failed miserably to protect the constitutional rights of Muslim Canadians to express themselves and to be themselves. In Canada, the country that celebrates all cultures, all of a sudden, the most iconic cultural keffiyeh was banned, leaving many community members questioning their identity. More importantly, attempts to silence Canadian Muslims by threatening their livelihoods was the worst and the most painful one. Firing many Canadian Muslims and threatening many others in an attempt to silence them has been a shameful and horrible act that shocked thousands in our community, including our imams and community leaders. Honorable members, I have counseled even Muslim lawyers who are fearful to utter a word or even express their pain to their colleagues while they mourn the loss of immediate family members in Gaza. Allow me to share two stories from our local community in Halifax that illustrate the personal toll of these injustices. Yara, the only Muslim Arab woman working in the media in all the Atlantic, CTV News. She was fired from her job immediately over alleged comments she made. And the same woman was a victim for continuous bullying, harassment, and discrimination for over a year in the same workplace. And despite these incidents being documented and reported, it was ultimately neglected. I leave you to imagine the impact of such incidents on all the women in our community and the youth. Nargis, the only Muslim woman working in politics in Halifax, working for the Minister of Immigration and the PC government, was fired immediately as well in a very humiliating way over alleged comments she did not even make. Furthermore, many imams and Muslim chaplains like Imam Arij Anwar and many others were also fired from their jobs in hospitals and universities with no legal consequences. I can sit here and tell many untold stories to the committee. However, I watched the previous sessions held last week, and I heard honorable members asking about solutions. Here are a few measures I believe can make a difference. At the Ummah Society, we have started providing training to local police officers, first responders, government officials, etc., about Islam, Muslim cultures, about Islamophobia, and about religious and cultural sensitivities. We have seen the impact of providing these trainings that were attended by many every year, and we have seen this impact in our city. Mandating such training for government officials and make it a requirement to receive government funding, I believe would make a huge difference. In Halifax, we successfully advocated for the establishment of the first hate crime unit in the Atlantic. Before that, we did not have one in the whole Atlantic Canada. However, it is struggling to operate because of lack of funding from the municipality. The federal support by funding the hate crime units across the country would make huge impact in reporting, counting, and analyzing and protecting all community members. Thank you for the invitation and for this great work you are doing.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Right on time. And for the last 5 minutes, please to Madame Julie McFarlane, Professor. You're on mute, Madame.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and members of the committee. My name is Julie McFarlane, and I am an Emerita Distinguished Professor of Law. In my presentation today, I'm going to say a few words about some research that I conducted in 2010 to 2012 and the book that I wrote as a result, which was about Muslim marriage and divorce customs in North America as practiced amongst North American Muslims, both here in Canada and in the US.
Sorry to interrupt you, Madame McFarlane. Can you please put the boom between your mouth and...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Down.
Okay, I did stop your time, but I'll start it again. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So in my testimony, I'm going to say something about the work that I did in 2010 to 2012 and a little bit beyond that, working with Muslim community members in Canada and in the US, and what I learned about Islamophobia as somebody coming very new and very ignorant to this area. I want to say a little bit about events post October the 7th, although I don't have empirical data, but I do have some observations on that point. And finally, a couple of suggestions as to measures to build on my colleagues' points that you've already heard. When I began to study the role of Islamic laws in the ways in which North American Muslims conducted their marriage and divorces. I was doing so because all I had heard about this from the media was that it was a very, very bad and terrifying thing. In fact, I distinctly remember a student coming into my office one day at the university and saying to me, I'd like to write a paper on Sharia law. And I asked, well, what do you know about Sharia law? And they said, well, nothing, but I know it's really bad. And I think that in some ways was a summary for what I discovered over the next subsequent years of my research. Lots and lots of lack of knowledge and information and lots of prejudice in a way that, was truly astonishing to me. And I am extremely grateful for the coaching that I received from imams, from members of the communities, as I found my way through to do this research and to talk with people about a very sensitive subject, obviously, which is how they handle their family transitions, both marriage and divorce. And the first thing that I learned was that Sharia law is a term that's been made up by the Western media. There is Sharia and there is Islamic law, and they are two different things. Sharia is the path that Muslims follow in order to live a good life. It's a totally personal experience. As one imam once told me, there is a Sharia for every Muslim in Canada, which I thought really encapsulated this. And, this was one of the first sort of staggering revelations that I had, that rather than being something that Muslims wanted to, as the media would have it, inflict on everybody, this horrible sounding Sharia law that seemed to involve lots of nasty punishments. In fact, Sharia was a deeply personal value system, which did vary from person to person. And Islamic law were the principles that had been built out of the Quranic texts and the Hadith by jurisprudence in the 4th century onwards. And of course, these were male jurists. So a lot of that jurisprudence is somewhat male-centric, which is a tendency of every single Western system that was developed in the 4th century and still some today. So I, first of all, realized that there was a lot of ignorance that created fear. And that in actual fact, this idea that there was some kind of deep seething resentment going along inside Muslim communities in Canada and the US, in which they desperately wanted other people to accept their system, was actually completely baseless. There was no basis for that. And I asked people, talked to people constantly in hundreds of interviews about this. And I never heard a single person in that group say that they thought that Sharia should be imposed on non-Muslims. And if you take that out of the picture, then you understand a great deal more about the fear and prejudice that has developed towards the Muslim community and its lack of basis. So in terms of some measures that I think are super important as a result of that work, I think working with the imams is really important because the imams are a very, very important source of influence, and they're also family problem solvers in many communities. I think that there need to be some clear standards around dealing with domestic violence. And obviously, there's an issue of women's governance in mosques, but certainly it's important to work with the imams. It's also important, I believe, to work with kids at school.
Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We will now, and I will be faithful to keeping the time. Yes, Mr. Asazi?
Madam Chair, I just noticed that Mr. Morris from the Green Party is here. I was wondering if you would care to ask for unanimous consent.
Well, if you're asking me to ask, I'd be pleased to ask. I guess Mr. Morris is asking for unanimous consent to be allowed a 2.5-minute slot to ask questions. No? I'm sorry. I'm hearing all kinds of no's on my left side of the table. Thank you. Now, go to 6 minutes each per each of the four parties here, and I will be faithful and try and keep the time as best as I can. Can we please stick to the subject at hand so that I don't have to entertain any points of order, because I will have to be strict on time. We have a hard stop at 30 minutes past the hour. I will start with MP Van Popta, I believe. No? Okay. Okay. MP Givani, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the witnesses for being here and for your contributions to this conversation. I certainly think that we are due for an important conversation about religious freedom in our country, and this has been an important part of that discussion. I want to start off by just maybe trying to give a bit of my perspective as a person from the suburbs of Toronto. Since 2021, we've had over 100 Christian churches burned, vandalized, or desecrated in Canada. And sometimes when I see that, and I see the lack of media coverage of those attacks on religious freedom, when I see that we cannot even in the House of Commons get every party to agree on condemning those attacks on religious freedom, I think to myself, like, yo, dog, are we like in the Truman Show or something right now? Like, it just seems so frustrating and puzzling how you get to this point. And often I will hear from constituents who are concerned about it, and they'll say, express a sense of hopelessness. Like, well, how do you get people to care about this? And then I see other communities go through their own ordeals when it comes to attacks on their religious freedom. We've seen, schools and synagogues get shot at in Montreal, or just over the weekend, we've seen the House hate-motivated attack on a Muslim family in London. And I think to myself, well, maybe there's an opportunity for us all to work together and draw attention to the various ways that faith communities in this country may experience discrimination or persecution. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to build some bridges across different religious communities in hopes that the experiences that are happening throughout this country right now, where people feel in many ways afraid that they will lose their jobs by showing that they are a person of faith, or that they will lose something, their standing perhaps, in their workplace or their school for showing that they are a person of faith. That perhaps by working together, we actually wind up being able to protect believers of all different types. So I guess maybe I'll pose my question on that to you, Mr. Panju. As you think about, charting a path forward, where do you see the possibility of different faith communities being able to work together and support each other better?
Thank you for that question, MP Givani. You're right. There is a sincere division right now in our society amongst various cultures and faiths, and we are optimistic that we can get to a point eventually where this unity is developed. I understand that the purpose of these sessions is to speak about what governments can do, and there are so many things that can be done, and one thing I want to focus on is to speak about how government policies shape perceptions. I won't profess to be an expert in all forms of discrimination, but to the extent that I'm an expert in anything, it is Islamophobia. And I know that Canadians look to our leaders for direction. And the research confirms that when there is hateful rhetoric from the top, whether it's the government in power or other politicians or any other people of influence, other individuals from the community take notice. And there's a corresponding impact at the ground level. And so when governments introduce actions and policies to target particular groups, as I mentioned, that provides a license for other Canadians to discriminate against these same communities. So to the extent that Islamophobia is a recognized issue, and I think largely there's a consensus, but I know that there's some that disagree, I think there needs to be a tangible action and engagement, not just money that's invested in different programs, but a meaningful appetite to hear the perspective from those who are impacted the most. And so to the extent that governments can help to coordinate this, we think that would be a great starting point. So often, right now, Islamophobia, for example, is conflated with anti-Palestinian racism. And they're related but different concepts. Not everyone who is a Muslim is Palestinian, and not everyone who's a Palestinian is a Muslim. And for many Canadians, that's not an apparent issue. And the compounding impacts of anti-Palestinian racism and gendered Islamophobia are serious concepts. And we think the government needs to take an active role to recognize this and also play a role in educating our communities about the values and strengths that make Canadians who we are.
Mr. Perry, just a follow-up question before my time is up. There was a moment of hope, I thought, last summer, where I did start to see different religious communities working together. And the particular issue of concern for many believers was the matter of parental rights and the fact that at different levels of government, we had politicians who were actively campaigning against the rights of mothers and fathers to play a leading role in their children's education. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that as a potential issue for collaboration.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm familiar that matters of education fall under the provincial purview, so I'll be mindful of this committee and this head of government's jurisdiction. Muslims are not a monolith, and there's different perspectives even within our community. And so questions like these are important, and to understand how communities feel about these, there needs to be meaningful discussions within our community to get these answers.
Thank you very much. We will now go for 6 minutes to Member of Parliament Ahsassi, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And given that there wasn't consent for Mr. Morris to ask a question, I will share my time with him. Allow me to start off by thanking all of our witnesses. I found your testimony very, very helpful. Now, if I can start off with Mr. Panju. First of all, thank you for leading the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association. I've had the pleasure of receiving a few legal briefs, and the legal work was spot on and very, very helpful. So thank you for that. Now, in your testimony, you touched on the fact that since October 7th, we've seen some discrimination in the workplace. This is something that many of us have read about in the papers as well. And it truly, truly is chilling that if someone was expressing concern about developments in the Middle East or was of the opinion that human rights was not being respected, that they would be let go from their place of work. Given that it is a very significant issue, and it concerns me to no end, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, please.
Thank you for that important question. And as I mentioned in my introduction, there are serious concerns about members from our community about their employment prospects. And without repeating too much of what I said earlier, there are legitimate concerns that if employees or students or candidates make comments about the conflict, they will face repercussions. This matter was perhaps best exemplified recently with an instance of student protesters who had issued a petition calling for change and expressing their position on the conflict. Numerous students from the Lincoln Alexander School of Law signed a letter of support for Palestine and all forms of Palestinian resistance. And there was extensive backlash from the legal community that targeted the students who signed this letter, many of whom are racialized individuals, including many visibly Muslim women. So students were doxxed on various social media platforms. There was various organizations and commenters who referred to them to be named, expelled, deported, and labeled them as terror apologists. And many students received disturbing and threatening emails, phone calls, and messages that included threats of violence and death, as well as graphic videos and images. This is abhorrent. And following extensive backlash, this extensive backlash that I was talking about, the university engaged a retired Chief Justice McDonald to thoroughly review this letter. And in that letter, the justice found that this letter was not anti-Semitic, and that it was not anti-Semitic to criticize the actions and policies of the Israeli government towards Palestinians or to apply concepts from Islam, international law, like colonialism, genocide, and occupation, and discussions of and statements about the governments of Israel. And that's a direct quote from the justice's report.
Panju, you're talking about prospective work. These
Yes.
were individuals who were trying to get jobs at law firms, but then they were blacklisted. But I've also heard of instances where people who had jobs were let go because they expressed an opinion. What do you know about that? And I have very little time, probably 40 seconds.
Yes, that's right. This has been happening on a widespread basis, which was accentuated at the time of the conflict. There's a need for proper discussion about what constitutes hate in our communities. And if there are individuals who are actually expressing hateful comments and hateful perspectives, there's a role to deal with those. But right now, there's a lack of understanding and context about what words and actions really mean. And to the extent that all individuals are entitled to due process and fairness and civil rights, there's a need for the government to make this known to all employers to make sure that we live in a society that's reflective of the values that we adhere to.
Thank you. I will share the remainder of my time with Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Ali.
Just a second, please. I stopped the time. You have 1 minute, 54 seconds, but I stopped it. Professor McFarlane, I'm sorry. Is there a problem?
No, I just wanted to be able to say something.
Oh, I'm afraid I am guided by the rules of the House. I cannot recognize a witness unless there's a question posed to the witness.
Even when what I have to say is relevant to the question that was just asked.
Yeah, so witnesses are able to send anything else in writing. So I must continue because we have a hard stop. Thank you. 1 minute and 54 seconds left. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ali. Fawzia, it's so wonderful to have you here. It seems so fitting, given that the third annual Snapshot of Hate report came out from the Coalition of Muslim Women just last week. As you shared in your testimony, 115 total cases of hate and discrimination through the anti-hate services reporting, and a drastic increase since October 7th. I was wondering if you wanted to say more in terms of recommendations for this committee as they consider what the federal government could be doing in terms of additional measures to address Islamophobia.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to see you here as well. Sorry, thank you, MP Morris. To answer your question, CMW has actually released a number of recommendations at different times for different levels of government. One thing I think that Mr. Panju was talking about earlier as well, the actual definition of hate, and in our case, especially an agreed upon definition or description of Islamophobia, which is still missing, and a lot of sort of negative rhetoric that comes towards Muslims and others, their allies, who even try to take the word Islamophobia, say Islamophobia, is that there's nothing. Islamophobia is nothing. It's something that Muslims have just invented or something like that. Because there is no, and it's always sort of put against or pit against the freedom of speech. The idea is that somehow, if we are doing anything to address Islamophobia, it's going to curtail freedom of speech. So having an agreed upon definition of Islamophobia, gendered Islamophobia, and others, where people agree and community is involved, would be a great starting point for federal government.
Thank you, Fawzia.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated for that response. Monsieur Fortin, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Fortin, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses who are here today. I will jump right into it. I'd like to ask a question to Imam Yusri. I have a question for you. I listened to your speech earlier where you spoke out against hate speech towards Muslim communities in Canada. And you mentioned that this has harmed relationships between people in Canada. I understand what you were saying, and I'd like to know, in your opinion, do you think all forms of hate speech should be forbidden in Canada, or do you think that we should allow hate speech to have its place in Canada?
Thank you, MP, for the question. I understand that many sessions were held before with about the anti-Semitism, and I think that we are discussing now issues about Islamophobia, and definitely with no all forms of hate should be addressed and should be banned, and we should all work together to combat all forms of hate against Muslims or other religions and cultures. This goes without saying. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur l'Imam.
Thank you, Imam Yusri. I have a second question for you. At present, there's a provision in the Criminal Code 319 that bans incitement of hate and anti-Semitism. But there is an exception in the code that says that a defense is if a person has expressed an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a religious text that the person believes in. In your opinion, should this exception be eliminated from the criminal code, or should we maintain this exception and this defense and therefore allow fomenting hate if it's based on a religious text?
As I said in my first comment, we should work together to combat all kinds of hate and work together towards this with legislatures and actively. Speaking about this particular law or amendment that you are proposing, I am not aware of its details. However, I would like to say that protecting the freedom of expression and the freedom of people of the faith and all faith groups to practice their religion freely is a fundamental right that we have seen so many attempts to take away from this freedom through different proposals recently. One through the chaplaincy program to remove people of Abrahamic faith from being chaplains in the federal government prisons, and different types of legislations. So I would be.
Je vous remercie, Imam Yusri, mais comme.
Thank you. But since I only have 2 minutes, I'd like to hear your colleagues on the same question. I'd like to ask the question to Ms. Mazar. So it's the same question. In your opinion, should we maintain the exception in the criminal code, or should we forbid hate speech even if it is based on religious text?
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your question. It's a difficult question to answer as a layperson, and I will probably go towards thinking of competing rights under the human rights legislation, where people have right to practice their religion freely on one hand, and then people or citizens have also rights to live their lives free of harassment, free of any kind of hate and discrimination and things like that. It's really very difficult to say at this point for me whether we keep it or we let it go.
Okay, je vous remercie, madame. Je m'excuse.
Thank you. I don't mean to be rude, but we have very little time. I think we have about a minute left. I'd like to ask the same question to Mr. Panju. I understand that you are a lawyer and also president of the CMLA. And so don't know if you're an expert when it comes to freedom of expression, but in your opinion, should we maintain the religious exception in the criminal code that allows the defense of promoting hatred if it is based on a religious text, or do you think it should be eliminated?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I know I don't have very much time to answer this question. In fact, I see you have 30 seconds. I'm happy to give more details if this comes around another time. But for now, ultimately, it may be up to the courts to decide whether or not this bill is discriminatory. But fundamentally, our organization rejects the bill's underlying assumption that religions and religious communities are instigating and fomenting hate. I'm not sure what evidence this assumption is based off of, but it sounds a lot like religious and Islamic tropes that have been going on for generations. Our experience is the complete opposite, that these communities instead serve to build inclusion and enable the ability to contribute to our society. And the timing of this bill is concerning, and I'm happy to go into more detail when the question comes around again.
Thank you. Mr. Garrison, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to go back to Ms. Mazar and talk a bit more again about the rise in violent hate crimes directed toward Muslim women that you found in your community. I know you gave us a bit of detail about that. Rather than asking you what the government should do at this point, I'm going to ask you, what's the community doing in response to these crimes? And how is the community supporting Muslim women?
To you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your question. First, I wanted to start off by saying that this is not a problem that Muslim women created or are responsible for. This is not a problem that we bear the responsibility to tackle it. However, for us as Coalition of Muslim Women, from the beginning, we thought this is our home. And if there is a challenge in our home, if there is an issue in our home, we're not going to just sit back and let other people resolve this issue. So that really gave us a lot of strength, and we have been doing it. In terms of how the government can support community level initiatives, funding is very important. But as we have heard from different witnesses today, it's also the action, it's also the role modeling, it's also the language that the government is using, different levels of governments are using. Everything together is going to create the environment where Muslim women would be able to live free of harassment, not just harassment, but actually real physical assault, as we have heard so many times today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bazar. I didn't mean to imply that it was the responsibility of the Muslim community or Muslim women, but simply to say in the absence of action that I recognize that Muslim women are responding and providing supports to women. I want to turn to Dr. McFarland, who wanted to intervene earlier, and give her a chance to provide a response if we haven't passed that moment. And then if we have, I have another question for Dr. McFarland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. Just a quick point on the rise in worrying employment conflict since October the 7th. One of the things I want the committee to be aware of, and in this way your work overlaps with the work of the Heritage Committee, is that in these instances where people raise complaints about Islamophobia and prejudice and are terminated because of a remark they made or simply because they're complaining about hostility in the workplace, they are almost without exception required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So you're not going to know about the number or extent of these instances because they're hidden in an NDA.
Thank you for that important information, Dr. McFarland. At your opening statement, I believe you ran out of time and you were about to talk about working with young people and students in combating Islamophobia.
Thank you.
Please continue.
One of the things that this research taught me was how woefully ignorant I was, and how I believe many of us who have not grown up understanding anything about Muslim culture and about Islam as a religion. And I think that this is one of many things that we would do well to be preventative about if we want to avoid the kinds of confusion and misunderstandings and therefore fear which gets generated, and that's been generated in a very sophisticated way by a machine that's been driving that fear. And that would be to give more education to young people so that they understand something more about their Muslim classmates, that they understand why a girl in their class is wearing hijab, that it doesn't mean that she is being oppressed at home, but this may be an important choice for her. And the facility that is increasingly recognized for Muslim prayer in schools is expanded into giving some more information and knowledge to other kids as well, so that they might be able to grow up, unlike this generation, believing that Muslims are the other and they are to be feared.
Thanks very much. I just want to go back to, I'm sorry, Imam Yusri in the Atlantic, and ask about resources available. When he talked about there was no hate crimes unit except in Halifax. So what is his general experience when people experience hate crimes in terms of resources available to them?
Thank you, MB Garrison, for the question. Actually, it was not even a hate crime unit in Halifax. We have been working and advocating for this to happen and to be established, and it was established only 2 years ago after the Afzal family disaster in London, Ontario. And that, with that being said, the entire Atlantic Canada did not have any hate crime unit. Time is up.
Yeah, sorry about that. We may get a chance
Thank
to
you.
come back to you. Let me now go very quickly to the second round that we have. Very quickly to Mr. Moore for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today on this important study. My first question to Executive Director Mazar is about what I think is one of the worst acts of violence and terror in Canada, and that was the shooting at the mosque in Quebec City in January 2017. In 2022, the Supreme Court of Canada heard an appeal from a Court of Appeal of Quebec concerning the sentence that the individual received. I don't use the individual's name because a lot of the victims' families don't want to use the individual's names. But this individual was given a sentence which meant that he would not get out of jail, and the victims' families would not have to attend parole hearings. But based on the Supreme Court decision in 2022, this individual will now be eligible, who took 6 innocent lives, will now be eligible for parole when they is barely middle-aged. And this is we have heard at this committee the tremendous burden placed on victims and victims' families through the parole process, whereby every 2 years the families have to relive a tragedy. So we've been calling on the government to respond in some way to that decision on behalf of victims and their families. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Should the government respond in some way to that decision to ensure that we respect those whose lives were lost?
So if I talk from the perspective of the Muslim community, Canadian Muslim community in general, of course there was a lot of disappointment with this decision, and it was perceived that Muslim lives were at least perceived that Muslim lives are probably not as important as other lives lost. Comparisons were made with other cases, especially the case of the, I think, RCMP officers who were killed, lots of comparisons and things like that. However, if you talk to me personally, I would say that hate just did not kill for like 6 people that day. Hate also killed a 7th person that day. Similarly, for 2021, the person is alive, but the life is not the same for that person as well. Hate just does not impact those who are victims, but also the perpetrators so badly, especially when they're young, 20 years old, killing 4 people, and then sending that person behind the bars for the rest of his life, maybe not the answer to hate. So in Waterloo region is renowned for its restorative justice roots, with the Mennonite community's presence over there. We're CMW, Coalition of Muslim Women of KW, worked with Community Justice Initiative to start a mediation program for identity-based harm and violence called Sulah, which means peace in many Muslim cultural languages. And I would say personally, so I understand the pain of the family. Like imagine that 10-year-old or 9-year-old boy, now he's an adult, and every 2 years he has to go and present his case, and how traumatic that case that is going to be with him and other family members. Is there a way to find a middle place? Is there a way where the family doesn't have to go through all of this challenge of coming back? And then this is my personal opinion, and also like from the organizational perspective, are there ways to rehabilitate? Are there ways to bring bring restorative justice, mediation, not necessarily in the murder case? They will have to complete the sentence and things like that. But
Okay.
I don't.
Thank you. The chair is telling me I only have 30 seconds left. Those 5 minutes go.
17.
Oh, 17 seconds. And I did have a question for you, Mr. Panju, on you had mentioned the pressure on within the public sector or other organizations on conformity that minority groups can feel. I think
So, apologies, Member of Parliament,
There we
Monsieur
go.
Moore. I'm sorry. We will now go for up to 5 minutes with Mr. Zubiri. MP Zubiri, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Fawzia, it's good to see you in person again. I was happy to visit your center in your community so a few months ago. That was you're doing fantastic work. And I recently was in London, Ontario, just a few days ago to mark the 3-year anniversary of the Afzal family's passing. And I remember also on the night of January 29, 2017, I got a call from friends in Montreal saying that they needed somebody to handle English media in Montreal for a vigil that was being done because of the terror attack that happened in Quebec City. I remember at the time that I was almost not shocked that such a thing. I was not shocked, to be frank and honest, that such a thing happened in our country and province, my beautiful province of Quebec. I was not shocked because of the conversations that were happening at the time. And I think that this study exemplifies the need to confront discrimination, in this particular study, Islamophobia. And I'm still amazed how we can obfuscate the issue when we're studying this issue. We don't genuinely study it sometimes, and that is disheartening, to be frank. I am also encouraged, actually, when I hear, for example, Ms. McFarlane, and she brings me back to the lendemain of January 29, January 30th, when there was a vigil in Montreal. It was bitter cold, -20. And on the stage, we said, no politicians on the stage, no politicians. They get enough time to speak. And we had organizers and activists on the stage only. I myself was one of them. And I remember looking out into the crowd in the bitter cold in Montreal, how many people from across Quebec society, most of whom did not have any skin in the game at all whatsoever, across Quebec society were there in solidarity saying, no, not in our name, this is not our province, this is not who we are. And I remember for the next 7 to 10 days in each and every Quebec publication, each and every publication in Montreal and across the province, how there were the important human stories of who Muslims in Quebec are and vulgarizing who Muslims in Quebec are, meaning making it plain instead of putting forth discriminatory, putting forth things that are unclear and whatnot. So I want to go to Ms. McFarlane and ask you in just about 45 seconds, if you can. Please, can you share with us your path a bit more? I think it's really interesting. If you want to share with us a bit more. And then I want to go to Mr. Hussein Panju afterwards. Please, Ms. McFarlane.
Well, I was responding as a researcher and an academic to basically banner headlines, which if I had taken them at their face value would have told me that Muslims were biting the heads off chickens in mosques in Ontario in particular. There was a particular firestorm in Ontario that started this off. And I think it's just really important that people understand that they have so much to learn here and not to fear. And what I tried to do in my book in the end was to say Muslims, like all of us, they have their family transitions, they have their issues. And I would also want to add that in terms of dialoguing, which has been talked about a lot today, one of the things I learned is that many of these folks aren't observant Muslims. It has to be possible to include people who wouldn't describe themselves as observant, but for whom the cultural precepts are important and are just as discriminated against as anybody else.
Thank you.
In these dialogues.
And Mr.
30
Panju,
seconds.
I'd like to ask you you mentioned doxing of students. Do you have any recommendations for us as a committee to give to other bodies around that, in particular the Law Society of Ontario or Human Rights Commission? Do you have anything? And you can also submit this response in writing. Also, I'm interested in research around this particular point.
Yes, thank you. So on that point, we would encourage all parties of power to direct employees to abandon all blacklists regarding political expression and ensure that employees are treated fairly, that there should be prohibiting disciplinary measures against students or staff who engage in these sorts of activities as well.
Thank you very much. If there's anything more, please do submit them in. For the last 2.5 minutes, please, Monsieur Fortin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Dr. McFarlane. In your opinion, if you look at discrimination, violence, whether it's towards the Muslim community or Jewish communities or any other type of discrimination based on race, color of skin, gender, aren't we at a time where we have to abolish all types of hate? And in that sense, don't you think that promoting hatred in Canada should be forbidden, even if it's based on a religious text or religious opinion?
I think that it's extremely important that we remain very vigilant about hate speech. And I am a big supporter of the need to have hate speech principles to protect people. But I also think that one of the things that we do in our legal system is we exclude any kind of reasoning. It's very interesting. That might be based on a religious text. If you see a Muslim woman trying, for example, to enforce her mahr, her agreement that she's made under Islamic law for an amount of money to be paid in the event of divorce, the courts won't accept any arguments that are based on references to religious texts. That seems to me to be completely ridiculous. So I don't understand why we would not include reference to religious texts as part of what we want to protect in hate speech.
Merci, Madame McFarlane.
Thank you, Dr. McFarlane. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, for the next 2.5 minutes, please, Mr. Garrison.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. One of the topics that hasn't come up today has been the role of the media, the social media giants, in furthering disinformation and hatred. And I wonder whether, I'll start with Ms. Massar, if there's been any positive experiences in trying to work with the social media companies in stopping that distribution of disinformation and hate.
You, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. MP Garrison. For us as a regional organization with very little capacity, few staff, and all that, it's beyond our capacity to actually take these big giants into any kind of account. We have seen a tremendous increase in reporting for online hate, and it's coming from all parts of Canada, you wouldn't believe, from Burnaby to Surrey to everywhere, and people want us to intervene. We're trying to learn ourselves how can we intervene in these cases. They're sending us information this year especially. At this time, I don't have an answer. We don't have the capacity. But of course, we look up to the government to do things where there's some accountability for these big giants.
And thank you. And the same question to you, Mr. Panju. What about trying to hold them accountable for promoting hatred?
Thank you for that question. So we're familiar that Bill 63 is currently before the House. It's a complex issue, and I think that there needs to be some more dialogue with our groups on a more directed basis. You're right, equity-seeking groups like ours are often the victims of and the targets of hate speech, but there also needs to be some more consultation to ensure that any such measures do not overly censor legitimate non-hateful speech from equity-seeking groups as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. So as the chair, let me thank all our witnesses in all our panels, and particularly the ones before me here. This completes this particular study, and as an Atlantic Canadian and a Nova Scotian, I want to thank you, Imam Yusri, for shedding some light on Atlantic Canada, because I feel a lot of times where it's a bit overlooked by the bigger centres. And thank you for talking about the training that you are conducting with police officers and everyone else, and of course the many interfaith activities that you've been organizing over the many number of years in which I personally have attended, and we all know that these interconnections are so important. So colleagues, it's 1:28. Thank you very much for attending today. And as I said, this completes the study of this particular one. You will receive from the clerk in due course the activities for Thursday. So have a good day, and we'll see everybody on Thursday. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned. Agreed?